Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 117. Narrated by Aisha, 11 women sat, at a place, and promised and contracted that they would not conceal anything of the news of their husbands. The first one said, "My husband is like the meat of a lean weak camel which is kept on the top of a mountain which is neither easy to climb, nor is the meat fat, so that one might put up with the trouble of fetching it." The second one said, "I shall not relate my husband's news, for I fear that I may not be able to finish his story, for if I describe him, I will mention all his defects and bad traits." The third one said, "My husband is a tall man, if I describe him, and he hears of that, he will divorce me, and if I keep quiet, he will neither divorce me nor treat me as a wife." The fourth one said, "My husband is a moderate person like the night of Tahama which is neither hot nor cold. I am neither afraid of him, nor am I discontented with him." The fifth one said, "My husband, when entering the house, is a leopard, and when going out, is a lion. He does not ask about whatever is in the house." The sixth one said, "If my husband eats he eats too much, leaving the dishes empty, and if he drinks he leaves nothing, and if he sleeps alone, away from me, covered in garments and does not stretch his hands here and there so as to know how I fare, get along." The seventh one said, "My husband is a wrongdoer or weak and foolish. All the defects are present in him. He may injure your head or your body or may do both." The eighth one said, "My husband is soft to touch like a rabbit and smells like a zarnab, a kind of good-smelling grass." The ninth one said, "My husband is a tall generous man wearing a long strap for carrying his sword. His ashes are abundant and his house is near to the people who would easily consult him." The 10th one said, "My husband is Malik." And what is Malik? Malik is greater than whatever I say about him. He is beyond and above all praises which can come to my mind. Most of his camels are kept at home, ready to be slaughtered for the guests, and only a few are taken to the pastures. When the camels hear the sound of the lute, or the tambourine, they realize that they are going to be slaughtered for the guests." The 11th one said, "My husband is Abu Zar." And what is Abu Zar, i.e., what should I say about him? He has given me many ornaments and my ears are heavily loaded with them and my arms have become fat, i.e., I have become fat. And he has pleased me, and I have become so happy that I feel proud of myself. He found me with my family who were mere owners of sheep and living in poverty, and brought me to a respected family having horses and camels and threshing and purifying grain. Whatever I say, he does not rebuke or insult me. When I sleep till late in the morning, and when I drink water, or milk, I drink my fill." The mother of Abu Zar. And what may one say in praise of the mother of Abu Zar? Her saddle bags were always full of provision and her house was spacious. As for the son of Abu Zar, what may one say of the son of Abu Zar? His bed is as narrow as an unsheathed sword and an arm of a kid, of 4 months, satisfies his hunger. As for the daughter of Abu Zar, she is obedient to her father and to her mother. She has a fat well-built body and that arouses the jealousy of her husband's other wife. As for the maid, slave girl of Abu Zar, what may one say of the maid, slave girl of Abu Zar? She does not uncover our secrets but keeps them, and does not waste our provisions and does not leave the rubbish scattered everywhere in our house." The 11th lady added, "One day it so happened that Abu Zar went out at the time when the milk was being milked from the animals, and he saw a woman who had 2 sons like 2 leopards playing with her 2 breasts. On seeing her, he divorced me and married her. Thereafter I married a noble man who used to ride a fast tireless horse and keep a spear in his hand. He gave me many things, and also a pair of every kind of livestock and said, 'Eat of this, O Zar, and give provision to your relatives.' She added, 'Yet, all those things which my second husband gave me could not fill the smallest utensil of Abu Zar's.' Aisha then said, 'Allah's apostle said to me, I am to you as Abu Zar was to his wife Zar.' Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 118. Narrated by Ursa, Aisha said, while the Ethiopians were playing with their small spears, Allah's apostle screened me behind him and I watched that display, and kept on watching till I left on my own. So you may estimate of what age a little girl may listen to amusement. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 119. Narrated by Ibn Abasa, I had been eager to ask Umar bin al-Khattab about the two ladies from among the wives of the Prophet regarding whom Allah said, if you two, wives of the Prophet, namely Aisha and Hafsa, turn in repentance to Allah, your hearts are indeed so inclined, to oppose what the Prophet likes. 66.4, till Umar performed the Hajj and I too, performed the Hajj along with him. On the way, Umar went aside to answer the call of nature, and I also went aside along with him carrying a tumbler full of water, and when Umar had finished answering the call of nature, I poured water over his hands and he performed the ablution. Then I said to him, O chief of the believers, who were the two ladies from among the wives of the Prophet regarding whom Allah said, if you two, wives of the Prophet, turn in repentance to Allah, your hearts are indeed so inclined, to oppose what the Prophet likes. 66.4, he said, I am astonished at your question, O Ibn Abbas. They were Aisha and Hafsa. Then Umar went on narrating the hadith and said, I and an Ansari neighbor of mine from Bani Umayyah bin Zayd who used to live in Awala al-Madinah, used to visit the Prophet in turn. He used to go one day and I another day. When I went, I would bring him the news of what had happened that day regarding the divine inspiration and other things, and when he went, he used to do the same for me. We, the people of Quraysh, used to have the upper hand over our wives, but when we came to the Ansar, we found that their women had the upper hand over their men, so our women also started learning the ways of the Ansari women. I shouted at my wife and she retorted against me and I disliked that she should answer me back. She said to me, why are you so surprised at my answering you back? By Allah, the wives of the Prophet answer him back and some of them may leave, does not speak to him throughout the day till the night. The talk scared me and I said to her, whoever has done so will be ruined. Then I proceeded after dressing myself, and entered upon Hafsa and said to her, does any one of you keep the Prophet angry till night? She said, yes. I said, you are a ruined losing person. Don't you fear that Allah may get angry for the anger of Allah's apostle and thus you will be ruined? So do not ask more from the Prophet and do not answer him back and do not give up talking to him. Ask me whatever you need and do not be tempted to imitate your neighbor, i.e., Aisha, in her manners, for she is more charming than you and more beloved to the Prophet. Umar added, at that time a talk was circulating among us that, the tribe of Ghassan were preparing their horses to invade us. My Ansari companion, on the day of his turn, went to the town, and returned to us at night and knocked at my door violently and asked if I was there. I became horrified and came out to him. He said, today a great thing has happened. I asked, what is it? Have the people of Ghassan come? He said, no, but what has happened is greater and more horrifying than that. Allah's apostle has divorced his wives. Umar added, the Prophet kept away from his wives, and I said Hafsa is a ruined loser. I had already thought that most probably this divorce would happen in the near future. So I dressed myself and offered the morning prayer with the Prophet, and then the Prophet entered an upper room and stayed there in seclusion. I entered upon Hafsa and saw her weeping. I asked, what makes you weep? Did I not warn you about that? Did the Prophet divorce you all? She said, I do not know. There he is retired alone in the upper room. I came out and sat near the pulpit and saw a group of people sitting around it and some of them were weeping. I sat with them for a while but could not endure the situation, so I went to the upper room where the Prophet was and said to a black slave of his, will you get the permission of the Prophet for Umar to enter? The slave went in, talked to the Prophet about it and then returned saying, I have spoken to the Prophet and mentioned you, but he kept quiet. Then I returned and sat with the group of people sitting near the pulpit. But I could not bear the situation, and once again I said to the slave, will you get the permission for Umar? He went in and returned saying, I mentioned you to him, but he kept quiet. So I returned again and sat with the group of people sitting near the pulpit, but I could not bear the situation, and so I went to the slave and said, will you get the permission for Umar? He went in and returned to me saying, I mentioned you to him, but he kept quiet. When I was leaving, behold, the slave called me, saying, the Prophet has given you permission. Then I entered upon Allah's apostle and saw him lying on a bed made of stalks of date palm leaves, and there was no bedding between it and him. The stalks left marks on his side, and he was leaning on a leather pillow stuffed with date palm fibers. I greeted him, and while still standing I said, O Allah's apostle, have you divorced your wives? He looked at me and said, no. I said, Allah Akbar. And then, while still standing, I said, chatting, will you heed what I say, O Allah's apostle? We, the people of Quraysh, used to have power over our women, but when we arrived at Medina we found that the men, here, were overpowered by their women. The Prophet smiled, and then I said to him, will you heed what I say, O Allah's apostle? I entered upon Hafsa and said to her, do not be tempted to imitate your companion, Aisha, for she is more charming than you and more beloved to the Prophet. The Prophet smiled for a second time. When I saw him smiling, I sat down. Then I looked around his house, and by Allah, I could not see anything of importance in his house except 3 hides, so I said, O Allah's apostle, invoke Allah to make your followers rich, for the Persians and the Romans have been made prosperous, and they have been given the pleasures of the world, although they do not worship Allah. Thereupon the Prophet sat up as he was reclining, and said, are you of such an opinion, O the son of Al-Khattab? These are the people who have received the rewards for their good deeds in this world. I said, O Allah's apostle, ask Allah to forgive me. Then the Prophet kept away from his wives for 29 days because of the story which Hafsa had disclosed to Aisha. The Prophet had said, I will not enter upon them, my wives, for 1 month, because of his anger towards them, when Allah had admonished him. So, when 29 days had passed, the Prophet first entered upon Aisha. Aisha said to him, O Allah's apostle, you had sworn that you would not enter upon us for 1 month, but now only 29 days have passed, for I have been counting them one by one. The Prophet said, the present month is of 29 days. Aisha added, then Allah revealed the verses of the option 2, and out of all his wives he asked me first, and I chose him. Then he gave option to his other wives, and they said what Aisha had said. 1. The Prophet had decided to abstain from eating a certain kind of food because of a certain event, so Allah blamed him for doing so. Some of his wives were the cause of him taking that decision, therefore he deserted them for 1 month. See Quran, 66.4. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 120. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, a woman should not fast, optional fasts, except with her husband's permission if he is at home, staying with her. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 121. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, if a man invites his wife to sleep with him and she refuses to come to him, then the angels send their curses on her till morning. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 122. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, if a woman spends the night deserting her husband's bed, does not sleep with him, then the angels send their curses on her till she comes back to her husband. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 123. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle said, it is not lawful for a lady to fast, nawafil, without the permission of her husband when he is at home, and she should not allow anyone to enter his house except with his permission, and if she spends of his wealth, on charitable purposes, without being ordered by him, he will get half of the reward. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 124. Narrated by Usama, the Prophet said, I stood at the gate of paradise and saw that the majority of the people who entered it were the poor, while the wealthy were stopped at the gate, for the accounts. But the companions of the fire were ordered to be taken to the fire. Then I stood at the gate of the fire and saw that the majority of those who entered it were women. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 125. Narrated by Abdullah bin Abbas, during the lifetime of Allah's Apostle, the sun eclipsed. Allah's Apostle offered the prayer of the eclipse, and so did the people along with him. He performed a long qiyam, standing posture, during which Surat al-Baqarah could have been recited, then he performed a prolonged bowing, then raised his head and stood for a long time which was slightly less than that of the first qiyam, and recited Quran. Then he performed a prolonged bowing again, but the period was shorter than the period of the first bowing, then he stood up and then prostrated. Again he stood up, but this time the period of standing was less than the first standing. Then he performed a prolonged bowing but of a lesser duration than the first, then he stood up again for a long time but for a lesser duration than the first. Then he performed a prolonged bowing but of lesser duration than the first, and then he again stood up, and then prostrate and then finished his prayer. By then the sun eclipse had cleared. The Prophet then said, the sun and the moon are two signs among the signs of Allah, and they do not eclipse because of the death or birth of someone, so when you observe the eclipse, remember Allah, offer the eclipse prayer. They, the people, said, O Allah's Apostle, we saw you stretching your hand to take something at this place of yours, then we saw you stepping backward. He said, I saw paradise, or paradise was shown to me, and I stretched my hand to pluck a bunch of grapes, and had I plucked it, you would have eaten of it as long as this world exists. Then I saw the hell, fire, and I have never before seen such a horrible sight as that, and I saw that the majority of its dwellers were women. The people asked, O Allah's Apostle, what is the reason for that? He replied, because of their ungratefulness. It was said, do they disbelieve in Allah, are they ungrateful to Allah? He replied, they are not thankful to their husbands and are ungrateful for the favors done to them. Even if you do good to one of them all your life, when she sees some harshness from you, she will say, I have never seen any good from you. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 126. Narrated by Imran, the Prophet said, I looked at paradise and saw that the majority of its residents were the poor, and I looked at the hell, fire and saw that the majority of its residents were women. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 127. Narrated by Abdullah bin Amr bin Al-As, Allah's Apostle said, O Abdullah, have I not been informed that you fast all the day and stand in prayer all night? I said, yes, O Allah's Apostle. He said, do not do that. Observe the fasts sometimes and also leave them, the fast, at other times, stand up for the prayer at night and also sleep at night. Your body has a right over you, your eyes have a right over you and your wife has a right over you. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 128. Narrated by Ibn Umar, the Prophet said, all of you are guardians and are responsible for your wards. The ruler is a guardian and the man is a guardian of his family, the lady is a guardian and is responsible for her husband's house and his offspring, and so all of you are guardians and are responsible for your wards. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 129. Narrated by Anas, Allah's Apostle took an oath that he would not visit his wives for 1 month, and he sat in an upper room belonging to him. Then, on the 29th day he came down. It was said, O Allah's Apostle, You had taken an oath not to visit your wives for 1 month. He said, the present month is of 29 days. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 130. Narrated by Salama, the Prophet took an oath that he would not enter upon some of his wives for 1 month. But when 29 days had elapsed, he went to them in the morning or evening. It was said to him, O Allah's Prophet, you had taken an oath that you would not enter upon them for 1 month. He replied, the month can be of 29 days. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 131. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, one morning we saw the wives of the Prophet weeping, and every one of them had her family with her. I went to the mosque and found that it was crowded with people. Then Umar bin al-Khattab came and went up to the Prophet who was in his upper room. He greeted him but nobody answered. He greeted again, but nobody answered. Then the gatekeeper called him and he entered upon the Prophet, and asked, have you divorced your wives? The Prophet said, no, but I have taken an oath not to go to them for 1 month. So the Prophet stayed away from his wives for 29 days and then entered upon them. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 132. Narrated by Abdullah bin Zameh, the Prophet said, none of you should flog his wife as he flogs a slave and then have sexual intercourse with her in the last part of the day. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 133. Narrated by Aisha, an Ansari woman gave her daughter in marriage and the hair of the latter started falling out. The Ansari women came to the Prophet and mentioned that to him and said, my daughter's husband suggested that I should let her wear false hair. The Prophet said, no, don't do that, for Allah sends his curses upon such ladies who lengthen their hair artificially. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 134. Narrated by Aisha, regarding the verse, if a wife fears cruelty or desertion on her husband's part, 4.128, it concerns the woman whose husband does not want to keep her with him any longer, but wants to divorce her and marry some other lady, so she says to him, keep me and do not divorce me, and then marry another woman, and you may neither spend on me, nor sleep with me. This is indicated by the statement of Allah, there is no blame on them if they arrange an amicable settlement between them both, and such settlement is better. 4.128. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 135. Narrated by Jabir, we used to practice coitus interruptus during the lifetime of Allah's Apostle. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 136. Narrated by Jabir, we used to practice coitus interruptus while the Quran was being revealed. Jabir added, we used to practice coitus interruptus during the lifetime of Allah's Apostle while the Quran was being revealed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 137. Narrated by Abu Said al-Khudri, we got female captives in the war booty and we used to do coitus interruptus with them. So we asked Allah's Apostle about it and he said, do you really do that? Repeating the question thrice, there is no soul that is destined to exist but will come into existence, till the day of resurrection. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 138. Narrated by Al-Qasim, Aisha said that whenever the Prophet intended to go on a journey, he drew lots among his wives, so as to take one of them along with him. During one of his journeys the lot fell on Aisha and Hafsa. When night fell the Prophet would ride beside Aisha and talk with her. One night Hafsa said to Aisha, won't you ride my camel tonight and I ride yours, so that you may see me, and I see you, in new situation. Aisha said, yes, I agree. So Aisha rode, and then the Prophet came towards Aisha's camel on which Hafsa was riding. He greeted Hafsa and then proceeded, beside her, till they dismounted, on the way. Aisha missed him, and so, when they dismounted, She put her legs in the ангիր and said, O Lord, Allah, send a scorpion or a snake to bite me, for I am not to blame him, the Prophet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 139. Narrated by Aisha, Sada bint Zameh gave up her turn to me, Aisha, and so the Prophet used to give me, Aisha, both my day and the day of Sauda. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 140. Narrated by Anas, the tradition of the Prophet is that if someone marries a virgin and he has already a matron wife with him, then he should stay with the virgin for 7 days, and if someone marries a matron and he has already a virgin wife with him, then he should stay with her for 3 days. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 141. Narrated by Anas, it is the Prophet's tradition that if someone marries a virgin and he has already a matron wife, then he should stay for 7 days with her, the virgin, and then by turns, and if someone marries a matron and he has already a virgin wife, then he should stay with her, the matron, for 3 days, and then by turns. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 142. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet used to pass by, have sexual relation with, all his wives in one night, and at that time he had 9 wives. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 143. Narrated by Aisha, whenever Allah's Apostle finished his asr prayer, he would enter upon his wives and stay with one of them. One day he went to Hafsa and stayed with her longer than usual. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 144. Narrated by Aisha, that during his fatal ailment, Allah's Apostle used to ask his wives, "Where shall I stay tomorrow? Where shall I stay tomorrow?" He was looking forward to Aisha's turn. So all his wives allowed him to stay where he wished, and he stayed at Aisha's house till he died there. Aisha added, "He died on the day of my usual turn at my house. Allah took him unto him while his head was between my chest and my neck, and his saliva was mixed with my saliva." Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 145. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, that Umar entered upon Hafsa and said, "O my daughter, do not be misled by the manners of her who is proud of her beauty because of the love of Allah's Apostle for her." By her he meant Aisha. Umar added, "Then I told that to Allah's Apostle and he smiled, on hearing that." Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 146. Narrated by Asma, some lady said, "O Allah's Apostle, my husband has another wife, so it is sinful of me to claim that he has given me what he has not given me, in order to tease her." Allah's Apostle said, "The one who pretends that he has been given what he has not been given, is just like the false one who wears 2 garments of falsehood." Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 147. Narrated by Abdullah bin Mas'ud, the Prophet said, "There is none having a greater sense of ghayra than Allah. And for that he has forbidden the doing of evil actions, illegal sexual intercourse, etc. There is none who likes to be praised more than Allah does." Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 148. Narrated by Aisha, Allah's Apostle said, "O followers of Muhammad, there is none who has a greater sense of ghayra, self-respect, than Allah, so he has forbidden that his slave commits illegal sexual intercourse or his slave girl commits illegal sexual intercourse. O followers of Muhammad, if you but knew what I know, you would laugh less and weep more." Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 149. Narrated by Asma, I heard Allah's Apostle saying, "There is nothing, none, having a greater sense of ghayra, self-respect, than Allah." And narrated Abu Hurairah that he heard the Prophet saying the same. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 150. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, Allah has a sense of ghayra, and Allah's sense of ghayra is provoked when a believer does something which Allah has prohibited. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 151. Narrated by Asma bint Abu Bakr, when Zubair married me, he had no real property or any slave or anything else except a camel which drew water from the well, and his horse. I used to feed his horse with fodder and drew water and sew the bucket for drawing it, and prepare the dough, but I did not know how to bake bread. So our Ansari neighbors used to bake bread for me, and they were honorable ladies. I used to carry the date stones on my head from Zubair's land given to him by Allah's apostle, and this land was 2/3 farsakh, about 2 miles, from my house. One day, while I was coming with the date stones on my head, I met Allah's apostle along with some Ansari people. He called me and then, directing his camel to kneel down, said, "Ik, ik," so as to make me ride behind him, on his camel. I felt shy to travel with the men and remembered Zubair and his sense of ghayra, as he was one of those people who had the greatest sense of ghayra. Allah's apostle noticed that I felt shy, so he proceeded. I came to Zubair and said, I met Allah's apostle while I was carrying a load of date stones on my head, and he had some companions with him. He made his camel kneel down so that I might ride, but I felt shy in his presence and remembered your sense of ghayra, see the glossary. On that Zubair said, by Allah, your carrying the date stones, and you being seen by the Prophet in such a state, is more shameful to me than your riding with him. I continued serving in this way, till Abu Bakr sent me a servant to look after the horse, whereupon I felt as if he had set me free. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 152. Narrated by Anas, while the Prophet was in the house of one of his wives, one of the mothers of the believers sent a meal in a dish. The wife at whose house the Prophet was, struck the hand of the servant, causing the dish to fall and break. The Prophet gathered the broken pieces of the dish and then started collecting on them the food which had been in the dish and said, your mother, my wife, felt jealous. Then he detained the servant till a sound dish was brought from the wife at whose house he was. He gave the sound dish to the wife whose dish had been broken and kept the broken one at the house where it had been broken. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 153. Narrated by Jabir, the Prophet said, I entered paradise and saw a palace and asked, whose palace is this? They, the angels, said, this palace belongs to Umar bin al-Khattab. I intended to enter it, and nothing stopped me except my knowledge about your sense of ghayra, self-respect, O Umar. Umar said, O Allah's apostle, let my father and mother be sacrificed for you. O Allah's Prophet, how dare I think of my ghayra, self-respect, being offended by you? Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 154. Narrated by Abu Huraira, while we were sitting with Allah's apostle, Allah's apostle said, while I was sleeping, I saw a woman performing ablution beside a palace. I asked, whose palace is this? It was said, this palace belongs to Umar. Then I remembered his sense of ghayra and returned. On that Umar started weeping in that gathering and said, O Allah's apostle, how dare I think of my self-respect being offended by you? Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 155. Narrated by Aisha, that Allah's apostle said to her, you are pleased with me or angry with me? I said, whence do you know that? He said, when you are pleased with me, you say, no, by the Lord of Muhammad, but when you are angry with me, then you say, no, by the Lord of Abraham. Thereupon I said, yes, you are right, but by Allah, O Allah's apostle, I leave nothing but your name. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 156. Narrated by Aisha, I never felt so jealous of any wife of Allah's apostle as I did of Khadija, because Allah's apostle used to remember and praise her too often, and because it was revealed to Allah's apostle that he should give her, Khadija, the glad tidings of her having a palace of Kisab in paradise. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 157. Narrated by Al-Miswar bin Makramah, I heard Allah's apostle who was on the pulpit, saying, Banu Hisham bin al-Mughira have requested me to allow them to marry their daughter to Ali bin Abu Talib, but I don't give permission, and will not give permission unless Ali bin Abi Talib divorces my daughter in order to marry their daughter, because Fatima is a part of my body, and I hate what she hates to see, and what hurts her, hurts me. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 158. Narrated by Anas, I will narrate to you a hadith I heard from Allah's apostle, and none other than I will tell you of it. I heard Allah's apostle saying, from among the portents of the hour are the following: religious knowledge will be taken away, general ignorance, in religious matters, will increase, illegal sexual intercourse will prevail, drinking of alcoholic drinks will prevail. Men will decrease in number, and women will increase in number, so much so that 50 women will be looked after by one man. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 159. Narrated by Uqba bin Amir, Allah's apostle said, beware of entering upon the ladies. A man from the Ангիր said, Allah's apostle, what about al-Hamu, the in-laws of the wife, the brothers of her husband or his nephews, etc.? The Prophet replied, the in-laws of the wife are death itself. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 160. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet said, no man should stay with a lady in seclusion except in the presence of a dhum. A man stood up and said, O Allah's apostle, my wife has gone out intending to perform the Hajj, and I have been enrolled in the army for such and such campaign. The Prophet said, return and perform the Hajj with your wife. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 161. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, an Ansari woman came to the Prophet, and he took her aside and said to her, by Allah, you, Ansar, are the most beloved people to me. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 162. Narrated by Salama, that while the Prophet was with her, there was an effeminate man in the house. The effeminate man said to Salama's brother, Abdullah bin Abi Umayyah, if Allah should make you conquer Taif tomorrow, I recommend that you take the daughter of Ghailan in marriage, for she is so fat that she shows 4 folds of flesh when facing you and 8 when she turns her back. Thereupon the Prophet said to us, this effeminate man should not enter upon you any more. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 163. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet was screening me with his rida, garment covering the upper part of the body, while I was looking at the Ethiopians who were playing in the courtyard of the mosque. I continued watching, till I was satisfied. So you may deduce from this event how a little girl, who has not reached the age of puberty, who is eager to enjoy amusement, should be treated in this respect. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 164. Narrated by Aisha, once Sada bint Zameh went out at night for some need, and Umar saw her, and recognizing her, he said to her, by Allah, O Sada, you cannot hide yourself from us. So she returned to the Prophet and mentioned that to him while he was sitting in my dwelling taking his supper and holding a bone covered with meat in his hand. Then the divine inspiration was revealed to him, and when that state was over, he, the Prophet, was saying, O women, you have been allowed by Allah to go out for your needs. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 165. Narrated by Salim's father, the Prophet said, if the wife of any one of you asks permission to go to the mosque, he should not forbid her. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 166. Narrated by Aisha, my foster uncle came and asked permission to enter, but I refused to admit him till I asked Allah's apostle about that. He said, "He is your uncle, so allow him to come in." I said, "O Allah's apostle, I have been suckled by a woman and not by a man." Allah's apostle said, "He is your uncle, so let him enter upon you." And that happened after the order of al-hijab, compulsory veiling, was revealed. All things which become unlawful because of blood relations are unlawful because of the corresponding foster-suckling relations. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 167. Narrated by Abdullah bin Mas'udi, the Prophet said, "A woman should not look at or touch another woman to describe her to her husband in such a way as if he was actually looking at her." Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 168. Narrated by Abdullah, the Prophet said, "A woman should not look at or touch another woman to describe her to her husband in such a way as if he was actually looking at her." Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 169. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet, Solomon son of the Prophet, David said, "Tonight I will go round, i.e. have sexual relations with 100 women, my wives, every one of whom will deliver a male child who will fight in Allah's cause." On that an angel said to him, "Say, if Allah will." But Solomon did not say it and forgot to say it. Then he had sexual relations with them, but none of them delivered any child except one who delivered a half person. The Prophet said, if Solomon had said, "If Allah will," Allah would have fulfilled his, above, desire, and that saying would have made him more hopeful. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 170. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, the Prophet disliked that one should go to one's family at night, on returning from a journey. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 171. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, Allah's apostle said, "When any one of you is away from his house for a long time, he should not return to his family at night." Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 172. Narrated by Jabir, I was with Allah's apostle in a ghazwa, and when we returned, I wanted to hurry, while riding a slow camel. A rider came behind me. I looked back and saw that the rider was Allah's apostle. He said to me, "What makes you in such a hurry?" I replied, "I am newly married." He said, "Did you marry a virgin or a matron?" I replied, "Not a virgin but a matron." He said, "Why didn't you marry a young girl with whom you could play and who could play with you?" Then when we approached Medina, and were going to enter it, the Prophet said, "Wait till you enter your homes, at night, in the first part of the night, so that the ladies with unkempt hair may comb their hair, and those whose husbands have been absent, for a long time, may shave their pubic hair." The sub-narrator, Hashim said, "A reliable narrator told me that the Prophet added in this hadith, 'Seek to beget children.'" Children, O Jabir. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 173. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, the Prophet said, "If you enter your town at night, after coming from a journey, do not enter upon your family till the woman whose husband was absent from the house shaves her pubic hair, and the woman with unkempt hair combs her hair." Allah's apostle further said, "O Jabir, seek to have offspring, seek to have offspring." Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 174. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, we were with the Prophet in ghazwa, and when we returned and approached Medina, I wanted to hurry while riding a slow camel. A rider overtook me and pricked my camel with a spear which he had, whereupon my camel started running as fast as any other fast camel you may see. I looked back, and behold, the rider was Allah's apostle. I said, "O Allah's apostle, I am newly married." He asked, "Have you got married?" I replied, "Yes." He said, "A virgin or a matron?" I replied, "Not a virgin, but a matron." He said, "Why didn't you marry a young girl so that you could play with her and she with you?" When we reached, near Medina, and were going to enter it, the Prophet said, "Wait till you enter your home early in the night so that the lady whose hair is unkempt may comb her hair and that the lady whose husband has been away may shave her pubic hair." Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 175. Narrated by Abu Hazim, the people differed about the type of treatment which had been given to Allah's apostle on the day of the battle of Uhud. So they asked Sahl bin Sa'd as Said, who was the only surviving companion of the Prophet at Medina. He replied, "Nobody is left at Medina who knows it better than I." Fatima was washing the blood off his face and Ali was bringing water in his shield, and then a mat of date palm leaves was burnt and the ash was inserted into the wound. Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 176. Narrated by Abdurrahman bin Abi'is, I heard Ibn Abbas answering a man who asked him, "Did you attend the prayer of Eid al-Adha or Eid al-Fitr with Allah's apostle?" Ibn Abbas replied, "Yes, and had it not been for my close relationship with him, I could not have offered it. That was because of his young age." Ibn Abbas further said, "Allah's apostle went out and offered the Eid prayer and then delivered the sermon." Ibn Abbas did not mention anything about the adhan, the call for prayer, or the iqamah. He added, "Then the Prophet went to the women and instructed them and gave them religious advice and ordered them to give alms, and I saw them reaching out their hands to their ears and necks, to take off the earrings and necklaces, etc., and throwing it towards Bilal. Then the Prophet returned with Bilal to his house." Sahih Bukhari Volume 7, Book 62, Hadith number 177. Narrated by Aisha, Abu Bakr admonished me and poked me with his hands in the flank, and nothing stopped me from moving at that time except the position of Allah's apostle whose head was on my thigh.